So on our first category, our response was yes, reading and math, because that's required by the feds. So we move right into the next item.
Okay.
We decided on computer-based, and we had a lot of discussion about that, but we decided computer-based. I had shared our experience at Century High School with our top students having to go back day after day after day because they kept getting more and more questions because they were capable of answering the questions. And so our AP classes literally went in over and over again over a period of days to finish the test. So that was just one of the glitches, and we talked about the fact eventually we could probably tweak that and fix that in an adaptive test. But computer-based can be compared to other states, and we believe it will be cheaper. So that's why we ultimately chose computer-based. As far as high school content, certainly reading and math, but we didn't even know if this was a relevant category because we talked about using the ACT. So it's all covered in the anchor.
So ACT would be here then?
ACT is the next one. Yeah, our high school assessment, we would like to see the ACT only for fewer testing hours, expense. We have a long history of using that test all over the nation, and it is a test that matters to kids. So those are some of the reasons. Any additional? As far as the science test is concerned, we said to move it to 5, 8, and 10. And we have a big question mark on grade 10 because we recommended 10 based on our conversations that we heard today. That was going to be a good time to give it. But we also questioned, can we just use the ACT because that also has a science section. And so can that science section on the ACT meet the requirements for that test? That would be our question. If that's true, we would say just use the ACT and do it in only 5 and 8. And again, that's to move it from grade 4 because of the expression of so much over testing at that time and still trying to meet the requirements. And we still debated, what is elementary school, what is high school, how many times do you have to give it? But that's what we came up with. And we are all in favor of buying a test. It's practical, the expense is far less, it's normed, we can compare it to other states, so we were pretty convinced that we should buy it.
Okay, let's have any questions or comments for the legislative team. Anything that you would like a bit more information on? Any questions you have? Thoughts, comments?
I think the ACT also is a good test for, one of the things I come back to is what we heard from the young man from Mandan. On a regular 11th grade or 10th grade assessment, there's no buy-in from the high school kid. There's no reason, they get nothing out of it. But if we use the ACT, they get something out of it because in North Dakota it's tied to scholarship, $6,000 scholarship. So,
Okay. So that, and yeah, you had mentioned the kind of motivation of the student and the desire to do well. Other comments, questions, thoughts? Okay. So thank you, legislative group. That's great. We have a volunteer group for the next. Okay. This would be the association group.
Yep.
Okay.
You'll see a lot of similar reflections as far as in content areas. We were looking at meeting the law requirements as they are, so keep them current, and that's the purpose of the assessment as a measure of the school. As far as 3 through 8 items, what type of test we were looking at, we looked at computer-based. We can have the debate on whether it should be computer adaptive or just computer-based at another time, but for sure we thought the computer-based was the best way to go. With a consideration for any schools that might be lacking in technology, if we need to further look at, I know that we've already ran an assessment of our schools with their technology capabilities, but to ensure that 100% of schools have done that assessment and to know where they are with the ability to get that test.
A little bit more on this. Is it because of the time factor? Is it a cost factor? Combination of those things why you didn't do computer adapted versus computer based?
Part of the rationale between it is behind the purpose of the test. So we talked about in our last meeting that the purpose of this test is less about informing instruction and more about measurement of our schools. So when it comes to a teacher digging into the data, the current computer adapter that we're using isn't that as of yet delivering the type of information that we would need to really inform that instruction. And so to continue to send those students back to give that level of an assessment for something that doesn't do that is up for debate. But for sure computer-based, potentially computer adaptive if it meets what we're looking for.
Did you talk at all about response time and how quickly the results or how slowly the results are coming back to the schools? Is it a concern?
Absolutely, it is a concern. We anticipate, and I visited with the administrators as well, that will get better, we hope, over time. But certainly that our schools just received boxes this last week. But I know that there were a lot of extenuating circumstances with that with regard to paper-based tests that came out. And that's just a reflection on how long it takes to get a result back from a paper-based test.
Okay.
Really challenging.
Good.
As we look to high school content, we looked at obviously keeping current with reading and math. And then as far as the high school assessment, we were also adamantly behind the ACT only as being the assessment used for them. And then as far as the
how about rationale for that?
The ACT delivers the data that we need to meet the federal requirement. It's also the students have skin in the game. It's a test that North Dakota believes in. The ACT test is, albeit that there may be some other data points that you could pull from Smarter Balance in the 11th grade year. It's not worth the time to pull those students out of the classroom when the ACT can deliver what we need for those kids. Not to mention the cost. As we walk into more difficult years fiscally for North Dakota, having areas that we can tighten the belt on spending is smart.
Okay.
Science test. We also said potentially 5th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, looking at the spring of 10th and 8th. Looking to alleviate some of the testing pressure off those 4th graders and 11th graders. Really interested in what you brought up with ACT Science. I'd love to dig into that too, because if that would work, super duper. That would be fabulous. No, hadn't even thought of that, so good job. As far as buyer, hybrid, or build, we went also with buy, and we had one comment that we wanted to add to that is that we'd like to see all possible vendors be able to apply through the RFP process, and we'd love to have us or the public or whatever be able to view pitches from them. I know the Education Insurance Committee is going to be looking at ACT Aspire next week. But there's other ones out there that are potentials. Renaissance Learning 360 has a summative assessment. Smarter Balance, and they're currently, Renaissance Learning is currently saying that it measures up like Smarter Balance. Pearson's got stuff. Any others? We just would love to see everybody have a shot at being at the table, so the state can make the best choice possible with all the possible options laid out.
Okay. I don't know, Greg, if you can answer this. Several tables talked about it. Can't have states, or is the ACT subtest in science eligible to be a science, meet the science requirement?
I can't answer that. I don't know.
Okay.
And again, I think that would probably come out
With the new ESSA?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Interesting to examine it, though. I hadn't even
Yeah.
thought of
And
that.
I thought that was, especially since the SSA declares that an accepted CEE test could be used as a state assessment. But does that meet all the requirements of the physical exam? So for the peer review, I think that ACT will go through for approval.
This is, I know some of these meetings you folks are going, when is this going to get over with? But what I've watched happen is your knowledge of assessment increase. I mean, a lot of people know a lot more now than you did 5 months ago. And so when I walked around tables and had 2 or 3 tables independent of each other say, could we use the ACT subtest score in science to satisfy the science requirement? My guess is in September or October of last year, you wouldn't have been able to connect those dots and say, could that be possible? So I just want to say, I think the knowledge of assessment in this room has gone up a lot as a result of our work, and hopefully you're taking that information back to local school districts and other places. Great.
Peer review is an absolute requirement under the federal law. Under ESSA, there's the introduction of language that would be somewhat conducive to a college admissions test being considered for use. But that does not equate that it automatically would pass through anything. They don't say who that means. You still have to go through peer review. Peer review are still going to lay on the very same alignment, the validity, reliability, and all those other components of review.
And I think what that says to me is ACT has to be much more forthcoming than they have been in order for us to just blindly accept that they say that, yes, it's college and career, so just trust us on that. That's what that says to me. I need them to be much more forthcoming with what they're
Kristen, would it be more appropriate that their regional folks got in touch with you personally? Because I know I'm on the board, and our regional rep has said has had a double of the time getting in touch to have good conversations at the department.
Oh, no, they're coming on February 18th.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
No.
perfect.
Yeah,
Just making
no.
sure they're making the right,
Yeah.
because you can pick up the phone and get the wrong person or whatever.
No, no. So they're coming on February 18th, and North Dakota's not the only state in this conversation with ACT, and not with, so it's more of a concerted national effort for them to become a little bit more transparent.
Okay. So we've had 2 reports so far, and I want to make sure we get a copy from each table to Patty so that she can capture what you've learned. So, was that a volunteer to go, or you have a question?
I had a question.
Okay.
Both North Dakota and nationally, do we know, in our own history, how often have they asked us to, through that peer review process, said no or made changes? And like nationally, how often do they just say, no, you can't use that assessment? Or how often does that happen?
I have a kind of probably a more superficial understanding of it because I've been in office 3 years. Greg will probably be able to give you a deeper answer. So what I've learned in my 3 years is that the peer review process was firmly in place and was really active when No Child Left Behind initially. And since it expired in 2007, and there has been a real stagnation, that peer review wasn't really implemented. But it was revived a year and a half ago, that peer review process, since we saw the assessment. There was changes in assessments, that peer review process has been resurrected, if you will. But now it's in a bit of a limbo again because the requirements have changed for assessments. And so peer review has been resurrected, remains part of the SSA, and they're making, they're trying to find their way during this transition time too. Greg?
I've been involved with peer review since 1999. In the first iteration of peer review, it was under the old Improving America Schools Act. It was not uncommon for states to get an outright denial of peer review in that first generation. We were among those states. And in the iterations that we went through in 2002, 2003, 2005, 2007, what they do is they put you in series of categorizations moving toward what would be relative perfection. And so if you are not meeting a certain area, you must continue to work to meet the specifications of that section. And there are roughly about 8 major categories that you have to address. If you excel in 3, those 3 are done. You have to deal with the other 5. And you keep chipping away, chipping away, chipping away until you're done. When the system stopped in 2009, the state was compliant entirely with all the requirements of peer review. Peer review now is starting again this year. And so every state that has gone through any change of a test, and we are one of those, must go through peer review. As it stands right now, we have to put together our peer review. I'm also on the sitting committee of the peer review preparation work for Smarter Balanced. So working in 2 straddled worlds in this regard. The feds are not going to change in terms of what they see the relative rigor, but we won't know until we go through this next iteration of reviews how it's going to roll out for all these various efforts as it goes.
And the Department of Ed is very clear when they say peer review. And when I was out for my last meeting, when my colleagues and I went and met with them, they were very clear to say, this isn't a peer review of U.S. Department of Ed. It's much like advanced accreditation when a team of your peers comes in. And so it isn't, there's just the guidelines of what acceptability, alignment, comparability, all of those things. And so it's states evaluating other states.
Anonymously, right?
Anonymously.
Yeah, you don't know who your critics are. I remember in the department, it was a painful process in that 03 to 08 period of time.
Yes.
And I compared it to being discharged from the hospital. They would say, okay, if you could do these 5 things, you can go. And you might do 2 or 3 of them, and you haven't done 2 more, and you're waiting for the doctor to come back to approve whether you could go or not, and the doctor would never come back. You'd send things into the department, and it might be months with no response. And so it can be a very painful process and a long process.
And one other thing that I learned about it that may or may not be of value to you, but it was enlightening to me. One of the things that they are the most sticklers about is to make sure that it's fair, especially to our subgroups. That there aren't things that are going to egregiously disadvantage our students that have learning challenges or a second language. And so those are the things that the peer reviews are very, very aware of.
Which also makes building an assessment that much more difficult, because they're going to look at every group and make sure that they have the fair
They
and
are
same
very
opportunities.
protective of those kids of those students
Right.
that might be experiencing extra challenges.
Just a question, we keep referring to peers, and maybe everybody but me knows who peers are. I don't know who peers are.
Other states.
So who in
Other
other
states
states?
like,
Well, who in other states know?
Assessment and accountability.
Are these their State Department of Ed employees that are
Some
doing
members
these?
may be, other members could be educators, teachers. Some members may be State
When
Department.
you say educators, you mean college or,
Right.
okay, so it could be nothing but college and employees of Department of Eds all over the United States that are deciding what classroom work is going on.
It could be, but just like when you have your advanced ed, it's a balanced team most often.
Okay.
If I break in, the rules with the U.S. Department of Education are very clear. By policy, they do not allow U.S. Department of Education staff to be considered a peer reviewer. They cannot be a peer reviewer.
Okay.
Peers are sought from nominations that come from across the country. It could be people who are understood as test development specialists, psychometricians. It could be from departments of education who work in the area of assessments or accountabilities or development of standards. It could come from university centers. It could come from certain centers of assessment expertise or the like. They are submitted, they are reviewed. Committees of about 3 to 5 are appointed for every state, and then that's the basis for the review. They try to keep the peers consistent during the course of the review of each individual state. If you get into a tussle, and we did in 2005 with one of our peer groups, we had the group fired, and a new group was assigned. And so it's not that the states are just sitting there taking it as it comes, and we get our fair share, but we can push back to the degree if we believe that a breach has occurred in terms of the overall standards, criteria, and application of those to the state's application. It is much like going to court. You're putting your case, the others are coming in, making sure that the evidence itself is legitimate, that reaches that level, and then you have at it. It is rigorous. Nobody gets off easy on this one, including peers.
yes.
We can go next.
Okay.
So we talked about our 3 through 8 content being reading and math, but we also, this will come up later, but we also feel like if we put out an RFP for a suite that includes science, we really take away that discussion of needing to change the grade level. For example, we just administered the ACT Aspire test to my sophomores a couple months ago, and the science portion was embedded right in it, and it wasn't an issue. The reason we're dealing with this as a separate topic is because our science test has been separate. It's been paper pencil, and it's been done in the fall. But if we get a suite that has science embedded in it across the board, we'd like to include science for those 3
Okay,
grades.
so you could include, there would be no harm in having vendors include science as part of the RFP. And we could easily separate it out if you decided not to do that.
Correct.
Mhm.
As far as the items, we all felt like the computer adaptive testing was only going to continue to improve, and we love that notion, but we didn't want to pigeonhole ourselves with only putting out an RFP for CAT. So we said either CAT or CBT. High school content, we said reading and math, but we also want to include science, just like we said above, and the same testing suite. High school assessment, we were in agreement to go with ACT for reasons of student buy-in, covers the science section as well. State law requires all juniors to take it, and the scholarship money that's associated with it.
Okay.
And underneath the science test, once again, we asked for it to be part of our RFP to incorporate that with the testing suite. And we did recognize that Smarter Balance at that point would be eliminated, you know, because they're not offering science right now. But we feel like if we can embed it if possible, we should.
Then what you're really saying is all grades would take a science assessment then?
Not necessarily.
Okay, then you would identify grade levels within the,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And then when we got to the buy versus hybrid or build topic, we all agreed to buy, and our rationale was research, expertise, cost, validity, and the time of implementation was big.
How about other administrators that might want to add any, you got a large group, so anybody else want to add additional clarity to any of the items? Yeah.
I'd just say on the science, we also talked about, because we were ready for the original one, the one that moved it.
Yeah.
But then we got to thinking about, we have most of the schools at K4 or 5, 6, 7, 8. Then you've got to test again because you've got to do elementary and high school unless that is changed to the federal law. So then that's when we went the other way. We can explain that a little bit too. It'd be nice just to have one test that they take all at once and that would solve the problem.
There's no perfect option for science, is there? No matter where you go with it, there's rationale to say it's not perfect.
It gets tricky with some schools, you know, where is the elementary cut off? And some schools, elementary is K4.
Right.
And so then you'd almost have to move it down to 3rd grade, you know, because some schools have 5th through 8th at middle school, so bump it up to 5th. Then some schools, like, you know, Beulah would have 5th and 8th be testing, or 5th and 7th, and move it up to 5th. So it gets a little bit tricky with the way some of our elementary, middle schools are configured.
If for some reason this wasn't included in your, I mean, it was included in your RFP, but you didn't select it as being the vendor of choice, then you're back to the drawing board on what grade levels.
Then it would have to be moved.
Yeah. Okay. How about questions for the administrative group? Feedback on their presentation?
I have a question for Greg or maybe Kirsten. Is there a separation on elementary? Is only these grades for testing assessments, and high school is 7 through 12 or 8 through 12 or 9 through 12? Is there any?
The section is related to federal law. When you're dealing in federal law, it's clear that it's 3 through 8 and then high school. And then it talks about grade span options for science, which would, so it limits it to 3 event times within a span of grades that represent an elementary, a middle, and high school scheme. But it's for the state to find what's the most desirable grade within those grade spans.
Okay, 2 groups left. We have parents and teachers.
Okay,
Parents.
I'm with the parent group, and we had a lot of agreement, I think, in our group, I think, as well as with a lot of what's been shared already. We agree with for the 3 to 8 content. We agree that math and reading is right, and the rationale was that because it's federally mandated, and then we want to minimize testing as well, minimize testing time. There was one suggestion that if we could get around the federally mandate, maybe we could go every other year, so you know, 3, 5, and 7, or 4, 6, and 8. The items we like to go with the computer-based. Everyone receives the same test, and it's easier to compare. I think it's easier to break down the results to make individual assessments of particular groups of data, and then less individual data can be potentially collected. High school content, we agreed that reading and math was the way to go on that because of the same responses, federally mandate and minimizing testing time. High school assessment, we went along with the ACT because it's also mandated by the legislature. We would like to see it aligned with standards, and that it doesn't make sense to double test with other types of testing, and will continue to be accepted by higher education for college entrance examination. Science test, we looked at changing grades in which they were examined to grades 5, because there would be less time for the fourth graders that way, and then the fifth graders would be, shall we say, more motivated. And the seventh graders, because the eighth graders seemed to be less motivated, we thought the seventh graders would be more motivated. And then stay at 11th grade for the using the ACT portion of science, which is already in place. So we kind of go along with what has been shared aside. There were 4 in our group, so we had a harder time coming to consensus as far as build or buy. There was so there was no tiebreaker. So we would say some of our rationale was we don't necessarily know what the costs associated. We would want questions that would. We do not want questions involved in collecting of psychometric data regarding behaviors particularly. And we want it to be cost effective. We want what's best for our kids, and we would. And one also is how could North Dakota benefit economically from building our own? And I think that once we get the numbers together, we can demonstrate those types of things.
So did you have a recommendation here, Gene?
Buy or build?
Yeah.
All of the above.
Questions or comments from any of the other group members?
I'll
Go ahead.
I'll explain that the bottom piece why
Right.
we couldn't. I think there's different ways to look at it. If we're looking at it, from a money aspect, well, sure, let's buy it. But, if we're only focusing on money, then we just buy it. But if we're actually, looking at the kids and what is in the best interest for them, and you had all the money in the world, that's I would build to meet their needs,
Right.
not, something sweet.
Okay. Yeah. If you're in an ideal world, you might do it one way. If you're limited by a budget, you might do it another way.
So I think